Assalamu alaikum and hello everyone. I'm your host, Hannah Zuberi, and welcome back to Justice for All Now. In today's episode, we'll be talking about a system made to keep people in prison. The American criminal justice system has glaring racial disparities, which are really well known. Black people make up nearly 40% of America's incarcerated population, and they're more than 5 times as likely as whites to be behind bars. Today, my guest will be Justin Mashouf, who is a filmmaker, who'll be discussing his film, The Honest Struggle, which highlights the problems of the prison industrial complex, prison reform, and we'll be talking about reintegration of prisoners into society after being released with Imam Abdul of RashidunDC. So, alhamdulillah, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. I'm going to read out to my audience, share with them some statistics before I get into a discussion with my guests. In 2017, the Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Statistics had estimated that nearly 3/4 of all released prisoners will be rearrested within 5 years of their release, and about 6 in 10 will be reconvicted. According to the NAACP, today the United States makes up about 5% of the world's population in prison and has 21% of the world's prisoners. So the United States has 5% of the world's population, but 21% of the world's prisoners. And 1 in 37 adults in the United States, or 2.7% of the adult population, is under some form of correctional supervision. So to discuss this and more, here are Imam Abdul and Justin Mashouf.
Thank you for having us.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me on the show also.
Thank you for being here today. So Imam, I'm going to start with you. Tell us more about yourself. You are the Imam and the president of Rashidun Foundation, RashidunDC, which runs the Rashidun Islamic Center in Washington, D.C. It's the only, you run RashidunDC, which is a service organization, and it's the only Black-led, Muslim-led organization serving south of the river, or east of the river.
East of the river.
East of the river.
Yes, east of the river. Yes, we're, when you look at Washington, D.C., you can see that they have almost wiped Islam completely out of the east of the river area. We only have like, we have like 3 functional community groups over here. And we are one of the largest of the 3, because we serve Ward 7 and Ward 8, which is east of the river. And they are like the poorest districts in Washington, D.C. We have 3 senior citizen buildings that we serve, and we have 3 public housing areas that we serve that are east of the river. And, you know, people, we have a tendency to think that because we're all right, everybody else is all right. But a lot of these seniors, they have been neglected by their family members. They have just been put in these senior citizen buildings by their children who have become doctors and lawyers, and they no longer want mama and daddy in the house because it becomes a burden, and it's easier and cheaper to put them in these senior citizen buildings, and the Muslims are here to the rescue. Majority of them, they don't even call me by my name. They say, "Where's that baby?" You know, that's what I am. I'm that baby to them. And one of the things that, you know, we have to really look at is that a lot of them are returning citizens also, because quite a few of the guys that I were in with are in some of the senior citizen buildings that we serve.
So Imam, tell me more about yourself. You are a returning citizen yourself. How long were you in prison, and why were you in prison?
Okay, I was in prison for 27 years, 9 months, and some odd days. And I went in for a murder one conviction, of which I was guilty. I was not innocent. I was guilty. I actually committed the crime. I'm not one of the brothers that was innocent. And I did 27 years in the DC Department of Corrections. Uh, Also, I was a DC prisoner, so I was confined to the DC Department of Corrections. However, I went to CCA, Corrections Corporation of America, which is a private contract prison system. And I also went to the Federal Bureau of Prisons during the course of that 27 years. And I had a chance to actually have hands-on experience with the contract prison system and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And we got blessed to close down the DC Department of Corrections. They no longer have the prison facilities in Lawton. That's why you find majority of the guys from DC that are convicted of felonies, they are in the Federal Bureau of Prisons or either Correction Corporation of America.
So tell me about this photograph here. How old were you here? And
well, it's going to be hard for me to say how old I was, but I was that was Terre Haute, Indiana, in the terrorist unit, which was an experimental unit where they was locking Muslims up. Actually, it was the first wave of when they brought all the brothers in after 9/11. They needed somewhere to put them because they didn't want what they thought was their brand of radical Islam running free in the prison system. So they came up with this idea of the Communication Management Unit, which is located in Terre Haute, Indiana. And it is in the death row unit of what is known as the old penitentiary in Terre Haute. Terre Haute is where they execute people. That's where where they execute people and gas people, whatever they do. They do that at the Terre Haute prison. And the unit that they took was Legendary D unit, which was the death row unit. And I did, something like 3 years, almost 3 years in that unit before I made parole from there.
And I know your story. Why did they put you in there? What were you doing?
What they really needed was they had to mix it up. They had to have some Americans in there also. But I was one of the imams in the system that was outspoken, and they wanted to shut me up. So they pulled me off of the yard, and they stuck me in that terrorist death row unit. And what it was, they had to have black, white, and some of the immigrant brothers in there together, so that the immigrant brothers could not file in court and say discrimination. And so they just used us as buffers to show that they were not being prejudiced or racist toward those people.
I want to take you a little bit back in history. So what point in your life did you embrace Islam?
And I embraced Islam 1977, the first day of Ramadan, 1977. And actually, I took my Shahada up at DC jail and got transferred out 2 weeks later and went to Lawton Reformatory.
Mm-hmm. And what's the story there?
What happened is, like, back then, you had like the Nation of Islam. They had just come under the leadership of Imam Warifdeen Muhammad, and they still had some of their practices like fishing for people. They called it fishing back then, where they would go out and get young people and bring us into the deen. And I had some kind of a little exposure to it when I was out here in the street by way of General Hassan and the Black Man Development Center. And the Nation of Islam had several areas, businesses right in the area that I lived in, which was Deanwood, Washington, D.C. So I had a little experience with them. And then like I said, the brothers that were there, they were always looking for youngsters with potential. So a brother by the name of Rasan, he approached me and started talking to me about Islam. This was 1977. This was just before Ramadan. And, you know, he invited me to come out and participate in the fast with them. And even before that, I was already leaning toward it. And I took my shahada the first day of Ramadan, 1977.
Can you share the story about the books?
Okay, yeah, I wasn't going to share that part, but one of the things that happened, I was over DC jail and I worked in what's known as receive and discharge, where inmates come into the prison and inmates leave out of the prison. We had a room there that they had where they would put people's property that didn't come back to pick it up. They would put it in the property room. And basically, you know, we had access to the property room. So I guess that was a part of our pay from the staff because they didn't pay us anything but $8 a month. So we got in the room one day and it was a big Bible that was in there. And a brother by the name of Kokomo, he took the Bible. It was a Masonic book in there. And Brother Squirrel, he took the Masonic book. And it was also one of the small Maulana Muhammad Ali Qur'ans. And I took that. And that is what made Brother Rasan come after me, because he seen the Quran in my cell. And he approached me and he said, man, you gonna fast during Ramadan? I said, no. First he said, Assalamu alaikum. And I said, hey, what's up? And he said, man, what you talking about? What's up? I greeted you with the most holy words of Allah and you gonna tell me what's up? I say, look, man, I don't know what's wrong with you, but you get yourself together. And he, in return, you know, he said, you Muslim and you got that Quran in there and you don't know what Ramadan is? I say, man, I don't have a clue as what you're talking about. And he sit down and started explaining Islam to me. Prior to that, I had kept reading the Quran because I had it for almost a year before I took my Shahada. And I couldn't get anything out of it. Then, you know, he sit down and showed me certain pages and chapters to read. And Surah Al-Fatiha and Al-Ikhlas was the main surahs that he always would sit down and talk with me about. And like I said, from there, Ramadan hit and I took my Shahada the first day of Ramadan, 1977.
You've been out now how many years, and what was leaving the system like for you?
Okay, I've been out 10 years now. January 23rd, 2020, I've been in the street 20 straight years. And I will say this is the longest that I have ever been in this free society since 1969. I first went to the Little Baby Penitentiary in 1969. And I first went in 1968. I got out in 69. I went back in 69 and I got out in 1970. And then I went right back in 1974. So this is the longest that I have ever been out in free society at one time, which is 10 straight years.
So you've been in and out. What made you not go back this time?
Well, when I came home, well, let's back it up some. When I came out in 1970, I went in 1974, November. I got out January 1980, and I wasn't prepared to come to the free society. It would have probably been better for me if I would have stayed and got myself together. So I came home January 1980, not knowing anything about the religion. You know, we had very few books back then. We were in the maximum security unit majority of the time. And I came home unprepared. And eventually I got drew right back up in to the same DC street life that I left before I went in, which was in Clay Terrace, Washington, DC, which is one of the most notorious public housing areas in Washington, DC at that particular time. So I got caught back up in street life, and I actually murdered a guy right there on 53rd and Clay Street. This was like 1983. I caught the case. No, that was 1982. I didn't come into the prison system and get found guilty until 84. So when I did that 27 years, I had a chance to get myself together. I looked at all my mistakes. And the first thing that came to my mind is an ayat in the Quran where Allah says, if you forget me, I'll forget you. And in turn, it'll make you forget yourself. You'll start doing stupid stuff and not realizing what you're doing, and you'll put yourself in the cemetery or in the penitentiary. So I got buried alive in the prison system for acts that were unbecoming of a Muslim. While I was in, all I did was practice the deen and fought the system the whole time that I was there. And when I came home with the thought in mind that I would not go back to the area where I grew up at, which was in Clay Terrace. I've been out here 20 years and I haven't been home yet. The street that I grew up on, I haven't been on that street in 20 straight years because they still do, 10 straight years because they still do what we did when I was up there. And not that I'm not strong enough to do it, but I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't go back up there because what they do up there, I don't do anymore. So when the groups that work with us, when they go up there to serve that area, I'll stand down or I'll go somewhere else, but I don't go up to Clay Terrace area.
So RashidunDC actually serves that area. It serves food and groceries and Pampers and all sorts of stuff, but you take a step back and that specific area you don't walk into.
That particular area, I don't go up there, but we go everywhere else. We go to Lincoln Heights, we go to Benning Terrace, Benning Park, 37th and Eli. We're all over this area, but I have to keep it true to myself. I made a promise to myself if I got out, I wouldn't go back up there. So, I just don't go up there. Now, that don't mean that I don't go on the outskirts of it. Sometimes I see a lot of the fellas and, we have programs that are set up, in this area because our building is in this area. But one of the things that helped me stay out here in free society is that you have to replace old habits with new habits. So I developed what Imam Musa called was liberating habits. When I first came home, I didn't come home broke. I came home, we fought the system and I won a couple of lawsuits against them, and I saved my money because one day I knew I would get out. So I came home, I had some money in my hand, and I was able to live on Masjid al-Islam's property for maybe 5 of the years that I were out here. And I didn't have to pay any rent. I didn't have to pay any utilities. I worked at the Islamic school over on Benning Road, and I was able to hang out with the leadership of Masjid al-Islam, and I developed liberating habits. I started practicing things that would help people and that would build the community up. And then that gave me a vehicle to practice what I had been studying for all of those years. So I came out and I was able to actually put Islam into practice as opposed to coming home, going back into that dunya community that I left and struggled with my Islam. I came out to a free Islamic environment, and that helped me to reintegrate back into free society. And, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't hard neither.
Beautiful. At this point, I'm going to invite Justin to come and join our conversation. I'd like to take a clip of Justin's movie and show this to you all. Justin is the filmmaker behind The Honest Struggle. So let's watch a trailer of The Honest Struggle. And while they're pulling that off, Justin, this is your second movie. What was your first one about?
So my first feature-length documentary is called Warring Factions. It's about trying to heal the kind of tensions between Iran and the U.S. with hip hop.
Oh, okay. Quite a turn.
Yes.
On it.
So here we go.
At the age of 18, I had been found guilty of murder, aggravated battery, and armed violence. My sentence was 28 years.
If they get me again, it's called 3 strikes you're out. I'm 58. I'm done. I'm tired. I'm so tired of trying. And no matter what it is that I do, a lot of times it just ain't working out. What was the call coming from again? Cell phone with no callback.
Reentry sometimes is a misnomer because it implies a second chance. And the reality for a lot of our brothers is that they never really had a first chance.
I began to think that the best place for me to be was back in one of them cells because it's the only thing it is that I knew. You have no idea what it's like, man. And every step for me has been very challenging.
Okay, so tell us, who is this? Who is Saleh, and how did you get involved with this documentary?
So I started the process of making this film essentially in 2010. I was inspired early on, if I can kind of talk a little bit about my story. You know, I come from a pretty secular household and was introduced to the story of Islam through Malcolm X and his journey and what his prison life was like and how that transformed him. So I felt kind of a close bond to that story. I felt like it had brought myself to Islam, and I felt a lot of responsibility to magnify that story. So when I had finished my film Warring Factions in 2009, I was corresponding with various incarcerated brothers throughout the country. And in 2010, I discovered the Inner City Muslim Action Network and their green reentry home that they have. It was the first, at that time, reentry home specifically for Muslims with a curriculum that addressed, you know, social, psychological, and educational needs of men who are coming home from prison. I decided that I would focus the film around the house. And in 2013, you know, I had wanted to document some of these experiences from the day they were released from prison to the day that they had paroled out, because especially in Chicago, the recidivism rates are very high. Nationally, they're very high. So I wanted to reach somebody, you know, in that very sensitive, volatile point of their journey and capture that. So in 2013, Brother Sadiq was released. He had been incarcerated for, you know, over 24 years for murder. And he came into the house, and he was really the first person that I had filmed and that I was, you know, concentrating on that really opened himself up. I had profiled a few other people that had lived in the house and other, of course, that I had been in touch with through letters and over the phone. But he had really fully opened up his story to me, and it gave me the confidence I needed as a filmmaker and a storyteller to really just like focus on him. You know, the film follows him for those 3 years. And, you know, alhamdulillah, his result was good, but he, you know, he's definitely he's an exception. He's not the rule. A lot of people, you know, end up being recidivists, or they end up being, you know, brought up on charges, you know, that are unfair to them, and they're thrown right back into the system. So essentially, that's the story of how the film was made.
So it took you 3 years to make the movie.
Yes.
To make the documentary. And what are the main themes? So it was, how many people did you see as you traced his journey that didn't make it? And what did you see? At what points were you able to really like glean those lessons out? Like what lessons that you think that during that 3 years course that you, and I'm sure you saw some of those or heard some of those in Imam Ali's story as well.
Yeah. It's difficult. There's so many barriers of entry. There's so many challenges. One thing that I'll speak to, that a lot of folks that are not, they don't have any relationship to the prison industrial complex, is that the amount of PTSD, post-traumatic stress, that is incurred to men and women that are incarcerated is incredible. So even if somebody comes out and, mashallah, like the brother mentioned, he said that, he came out with some money, that's rare. And even if he did came out with money, he also had that weight, that trauma that prison had, encountered on him. So just adjusting to life in the outside world is very difficult. Men and women who are inside, they're forced to adapt to a very volatile and violent environment. So the rules of engagement, the cultural interactions with how people speak to one another, conflict resolution, all of those things, that it's a totally different set of rules.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody comes out on the street and they use that set of rules, they will 100% end up getting in trouble, and may even get themselves, murdered potentially if they're in a situation that they're around, dangerous people, which is often the case of people coming home. So, off the top of my head, specifically, there was, about 3, specific cases in Chicago that just did not go well. The men who had come home, they were connected, even though that their dean seemed to be strong on the outside. They were connected personally to too many people that were still dealing in illegal enterprise, and they would maybe do small favors for those people that they felt like were kind of, relatively harmless. And that would ended up escalating into other things, into other types of relationships that were more dangerous, that were more risky. One brother specifically was recently, involved in, he was a very high up member of a gang in Chicago, and he came to Islam. He was involved in, doing community work, but his ambitions to help the community in some ways were interlaced too much with those gang ties, and he ended up getting murdered by the by the organization that he was involved with, because they saw that he had different plans than what they wanted, and he was still involved, at least on a personal and kind of organizational level with them. So, all these relationships, they're all very complicated. Then when you add the economic stress of having to make a living, having to keep a job, just think about the amount of, stress that people that, don't have records, they have at work. They have drama with coworkers and their boss, and they have to, you have to hold your tongue in many instances. For people who have, been in such a volatile situation as prison, doing that is very much difficult. And especially somebody who has street ties or who was in leadership organizations in a gang, to listen to a boss scream at you at the top of their lungs and then have to go to work with the same person and take orders from them. That's difficult. That's hard for the, for the nafs to swallow. So, these are all things that, some of these great organizations that are featured in the film, like, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, they address these in their reentry facility. It's not just, a bed and some meals. It's companionship. It's, it's prayer with, one of the issues that makes Islam so attractive to people in prison is that it provides a safe haven, a safe space, spiritually and socially. The Jamaat protects one another physically and also spiritually. The group prayers, group gatherings, the brotherhood, the sisterhood, those are all very attractive things to people in prison. So when they come home, if they don't get that same environment, it's a huge challenge. And Iman tries to mirror that experience in their green reentry home.
Imam Ali, let's talk a little bit about what Justin was saying, that brotherhood inside prison, that the brothers who come out or the sisters who come out of the prison miss. What is that brotherhood? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is it in real life?
I'll share an experience with you. When I came home in January 1980, Ramadan came around, and I had been used to being around the brothers in the prison. And that was the first time in my life that I had ever experienced loneliness. Mm-hmm. When I had an apartment, matter of fact, it was an efficiency. And I had fixed my food and I was hyped up that I had fasted all day. This is my first Ramadan home. This is the first day of that Ramadan. And when I sit down to eat, loneliness just came all over me to the point where every day after that, I made sure I went to Masjid Muhammad to break my fast. What it is, in there, you have the chance to really practice Islam. You study different things, and what you study, you're able to practice it in a Jamaat. Mm. And those brothers, they become your extended family members. Because some of them, if you and a guy, y'all in the cell together, and y'all been in the cell for you might be in the cell with one Muslim for 2, maybe 3 years. Especially if you stay in a spot for 5 years, you want to get someone in the cell with you that you and him, y'all can, let's say you can vibe together. Your spirits are basically on the same thing. And you be praying with him, y'all living there together. Y'all walk the yard together. For one brother, Abdul Hafiz, he and I, we was in Lewisburg back in the 80s. Then I run across him again in 90s, late 90s, and we in Leavenworth. And your love for them, you always miss them. Like right now, I have the other night, I stayed up all night here at the center, and I said, let me look at some of my pictures of some of the brothers. And I actually shed a tear because some of them will never get out. They have life plus. I have one brother in there. He had 300 years plus the death penalty. After he made parole off of 300 years, they was going to murder him. And and he's still there. What they do is they bury you alive in a concrete casket. And in some cases, man, the grave is better than being in those prison systems, especially with some of the type of mentality that the police have that are there. See, let me share this with you. One day we came back, we was in Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary, and we was walking down the hall, a group of Muslims, and one of the officers said, man, I went fishing and I caught me a big green bass. And the brother went upstairs, his Quran was sitting in the toilet. So, just being fair, 2 weeks later, that officer got stabbed up in the hallway. I'm not saying that the Muslims did it, but maybe that big bass that he went after came back and bit him. So you have things like that happen. We would be in Leavenworth, and we would be trying to play our Sunnah Rakat when you first enter into what was known as Al Musalla, Al Masjid, which was a multi-purpose room. And you had one of the officers here come up and want to pat you down, shake you down, while you in prayer, shaking, come on now, pat down, shake down. And, they play all kind of dirty games with you in there. And it's like what you said, if you're not careful, when you come home, you have all this misplaced anger and hostility in you. and then have somebody out here in free society don't have a clue of the time bomb that they're messing with, and all of that misplaced hostility and misplaced violence erupt on them. And the first thing they say, man, it's not that serious. But you don't have a clue where I just came from. What you did is that serious. Exactly. And this is one of the things one of the reasons why I don't go back up there where I came from, not saying that I was a kingpin or not that I was in a gang or anything, but I was one of the leaders up there because I lived up there longer than everybody else. So when you move into my neighborhood, you follow our rules. Mm-hmm. So, if you go back into that environment, one or two things is going to happen. Either they're going to pull you back into that fitna, or you're going to pull them back into the deen. And more than likely, they're going to be in a better position than you. And like the brother said, you're going to start doing favors for people. As you do a favor, you get a little more reward. The bigger the favor, the larger the reward. Next thing you know, you back out there and you rolling. Yeah. And you end up back in the federal penitentiary or down there in CCA. And things that you really need to examine is these private contract prisons.
Yeah, we're going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about this. I just wanted to just let the audience know that just here in DC, 67,000 of DC's residents, about 10% of the population, are estimated to have a criminal conviction record, and about 2,800 are released from incarceration annually. But these returning citizens, when they're released from prison, they continue to face hardship, some of those that have just been mentioned. And the challenges that they face include finding housing, financial support, and jobs because of their time in prison. So how many of us, if we run businesses, are willing to hire returning citizens? And this is a cultural, collateral consequences. They've done their time, they've come out, but they still, re-entry is extremely difficult still. And so I wanted to talk about a little bit, and then of course you've been away from family and those support systems that you used to have, and you're now away from the support system inside prison, just like Justin and Imam Ali had been talking about. So this leads me to another point. Our jails and prisons are mostly filled with America's poor. And we know that Black people have been economically disadvantaged, that runs really deep and across every measure of economic well-being. Black Americans remain years, even decades behind their white counterparts. And the racial wealth gap alone is so wide that it would take Black families over 2 centuries to catch up to the wealth amassed by white families. So keeping that in mind, Justin, I wanted to ask you, let's talk about this. Let's talk about why, and how are America's poor and America's poor children, Imam Ali talked about baby prisons are detained and they're in criminal courts. And, is it a crime to be poor in America?
Man, so this is like a whole, long conversation. There's so many facets and there's so many experts, but I'll try to kind of give you some gleanings from my insight of this topic. Mm-hmm. America, not only throughout the legacy of, Jim Crow and slavery and, the unfair practices and laws that were, imposed on Black communities. We still, and then redlining, of course, which is a huge issue of essentially banks not giving loans or giving, loans at higher interest rates, at astronomical interest rates to Black families, set them back, in that, income inequality. But you said, is it a crime to be poor in America? In many ways, the system as it currently is pushes, these communities into more desperate situations. And I feel like what we can do, it's important for us to get involved in multiple levels. Of course, we have the thinking of like within our own community, what can we do to reduce these gaps, to allow for more mentoring of communities of color. All of us have something to teach. All of us have something that we're good at that we could potentially mentor people in doing. There's volunteer, options for many of us to share the skills and the means that, God has given us with those who could really use it. So that in itself is an important, kind of activity to get involved in. The other is really at the policy level, talking about our government officials, those who we elect in office, and what they are doing to make these, large changes in society. Whether that, and then also at the level of district attorneys. District attorneys have a huge influence on the amount of sentencing time that people get for, essentially being, going to prison or jails. So and then number two, I'll say, there's so much to talk about here, is ending cash bail is incredibly important, because cash bail essentially encourages, locking people up for being poor. If you, commit a crime, or maybe you didn't even commit a crime, and you are put in pretrial detention, if you don't have enough money to be bailed out, you have to stay in jail. No reason other than that you cannot afford to be bailed out. So it's incredibly important for us to be active on this, on this issue and ending cash bail, because it disproportionately affects, poor people. And it shouldn't, like you said, it shouldn't be illegal to be poor. Everybody, you're going to have to face trial. Allow you to do that from home, as long as you're not a flight risk, and you're not a immediate risk of committing some type of extreme violent crime against other people. You should have the chance, like a rich person, to get out of jail and have your day in court. Especially now with COVID-19 happening, jails are hotbeds of infection. So us as a community, we should be looking out for, our brothers and sisters, and, supporting initiatives like Believers Bailout, who create bail funds for people, for Muslims, and getting Muslims out of these environments where they can essentially get COVID-19. And, now, just because they've been in jail, they've been given a death sentence because now they have COVID-19.
Exactly. This is how zakat needs to be used. I mean, this is something that we have forgotten, that zakat is now being used to do all this other stuff that I see consistently online, all these fundraisers where it's being used for, it's sort of that bubble of the rich. Providing classes for the rich, or providing, taking care of youth groups, and which is all important, but sadaqah can be used for that. You don't have to use zakat money that is specifically for poor people for that. And so that is something extremely concerning. And I'm hoping Imam Ali can hop back on. I think he's having a little bit of trouble. So, and we wanted to, this is, one of the things that I know that he does over here is use zakat money for commissary, for prisoners inside, to help them maybe fund their lawsuits, if they're find a lawyer that is better than the prosecutor that's possibly helping them out. So that is something that RashidunDC, or one of the things that he always tells me, is that families who get left behind, keeping them in touch with, because so when they come out, they still have that support system, that family. And this is something that I know I used to be a part of this prison magazine. We used to run, when I was a reporter for the Muslim Link, we used to do a monthly magazine for prisoners. And some of the articles, I used to ghostwrite them, was about like keeping in touch with family while in prison, how to like make it through, you know. And that was some of the and the letters we would get back from prisoners would be like, this is the sort of stuff we need to hear. Like we often get like these really deep books on fiqh and hadith and all of that, which is great, but how does that help us like get out of here and live a life outside? So that is something that is extremely important, is the sort of literature we're sending into the prison system. So I wanted to know, Imam Ali wanted to talk about this. Let's talk about the private prison system. What did you see in your work about the private prison system that shocked you?
I mean, the sickest part of the prisons, the private prison system, is that they're very involved at a political level in getting candidates elected. Okay, so this is what happens: is that private prisons give to the campaigns of district attorneys and give to the campaigns of the Senate and House, and essentially their interest in these in getting these politicians on their side is to make it harder for criminal justice reform. So they become active barriers in reforming the system and keeping it as it is, or even making it harder. There was a specific case in I believe it was in Philadelphia, that judges were actually getting paid to give longer sentences. And these judges have subsequently went to jail. Thank God. But, think about, it's always the thing is that, you catch one or two people doing it. Imagine how many people haven't gotten caught yet. Right? So there's a vested, these private prisons have a vested interest in keeping sentences longer and, keeping funding of reentry lower, right? Because you're essentially just warehousing people. You're getting paid and it's also at the taxpayer's dime. You and I are paying for, these systems. And these private prisons are getting rich by keeping people locked up. So it's a extremely sick cycle that we need to end. And if there's not one issue that can make you passionate or make you take action in getting involved at the local level of your different political races, it should be this one, is that look at your candidates and what they're who's paying for their campaigns, and are there any private prisons that are involved in their campaigns, and especially at the DA level. People don't even know what district attorneys do, let alone even vote for them. So imagine educating our community on what district attorneys do, how much incredible amount of power they have in sentencing human beings to prison and jail, and getting us involved in these races, and actually voting what type of impact that could make, because the general population is unfortunately not voting on these issues.
Exactly. Yeah. Just the level of education is, when we do this work, and just knowing who your congressperson is, the name of it's like so unusual for people to know who their congressperson is. So let alone doing the research of who's funding them and who they're answerable to and who lobbies them, all of that. This is why, again, this is our message with this show, is like one person getting involved. You got involved. You made an entire documentary out of this. Where can we see your documentary?
You can see my documentary on Amazon Prime. So if you have Amazon Prime, you can view it for free. Also, you can rent it from Amazon as well. Go to my website, honeststruggle.co. So not .com, .co. And you will be able to find all the links where you can get it. If you're in Asia or outside of the UK and the US, you'll have to there's another link on my website which will allow you to view the film there.
Okay, and you've won awards. Tell us a little bit about what sort of awards you've won and where all you've shown this film.
So alhamdulillah, we've shown the film in over 10 international throughout here in the U.S. and Indiana, here in California a few times, Illinois, and Florida. We won the Audience Award at CineQuest Film Festival in San Francisco. So alhamdulillah, we've been blessed with the amount of accolades we've received for the film. But what's most important to us is really to activate the community. Having more screenings and discussions in universities and at masajid, and getting people to volunteer and give their time and their money to these different causes, because the reentry population is an incredible untapped resource for us as a community. I always think about the story of Malcolm, and I always tell people that there are so many Malcolms that are locked away right now, and they're in your community right now, and you're not paying attention to them. They're alone for Eid. They're alone, like the brother said, they're breaking their fast alone, and they have nobody to help them really elevate their game and give them that platform. And I think it's our duty as a community to give these people a platform, because it's a benefit to ourselves. We're neglecting this resource. And I think with these various initiatives, we can help leverage this resource and thrive as a community.
Exactly. And it's so important because they're targeted too, because a lot of times they end up in jail. Like Imam Ali said, yes, he was guilty, but many of them are not guilty. Many of them have been entrapped or were at the wrong place at the wrong time. So many kids from the Rashidun Center will get texts in the middle of the night that, someone hurt someone else, and this kid was standing at the metro station, and now we need to find a lawyer because they're coming after him, and their mothers are upset. And just with all of the dynamics of the projects, gentrification, this money not being put in their schools, we in Baltimore, we have a gigantic youth detention center made, yet there's no money to put into youth centers where they can just play basketball, learn a skill. So all of this is quite systematic, and but at least until that system has been dismantled, there are few things that we can do and continue to do. One of the things that I have also noticed in doing this work is that there's a lot of, again, I'm going to go back to the sort of literature that goes into, so there's a lot of strange literature that goes in. So one beautiful thing that people can do in this Ramadan is actually things that you read yourself, like that you inspire your children with. Send that into the prison system, right? And so they're not getting some extreme version of the religion. That is something that when the folks, so Rashidun has a program where so disclaimer, I do sit on the board of Rashidun, and they have a system where people come out, there's a closet, you can get clothes, you can get books, you can everything that you need to sort of resettle back in, but a lot of times it's about the undoing or brainwashing what they've learned, some of the things that have been learned, and so that is what Imam Ali and Yusuf Jones, who's at Imam now in Chicago, they used to do circles of healing, just man bonding, brotherly bonding, just to give that support back. And this is one of the most neglected areas, population in the Muslim community, welcoming that back into society. And like you said, so much talent, they've cultivated that talent too. So many of them are so well read because that's what they, so they've educated themselves. Like Imam Ali fought his case himself. That's why he came out with a bit of money, because he was being harassed by officials inside the jail. And this man, I can't tell you, he won't tell his age, but he can easily be grandpa to my kids, and he's out there every day serving, every day, like anytime people, food, groceries, diapers, and he's just like, his goal has been, and I wish he had said this when he was up here, was that I don't want to let one more person from my community go into jail. Like, I want to stop it here before. And what are the reasons why people get into this? Is because they're not fed, because, you know, so you try to solve those underlying problems of hunger and poverty and homelessness. If you want to solve this, you know, problem of crime or folks. So this is, it's, you know, it's a fabulous effort that you have made. I'm so grateful to you. And how can someone reach out to you to screen this?
So we have a contact form on the website, honeststruggle.co, and you can also just reach out to me on social media.
So during COVID, like, suppose the masajid are not open.
Yes.
Is there a virtual screening that could possibly?
So we have a yes, that is possible. We can arrange for something like that. Also, we have an upcoming online screening with the Center for Global Muslim Life that'll be coming up. So just stay tuned to you know, our website and you know, join our mailing list. We often send out educational resources around this issue, and you know, we're encouraging all you know, masajid, community centers, and, you know, nonprofit organizations to really take this as a big priority, because we have a lot of work to do here.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Justin, for being here today. And I'm going to ask, so if we could get some, also, if you all want to support the work so Justin can keep making more documentaries, please do go to honeststruggle.co and support the work of Imam Ali at the RashidunDC Center. You can give to them through PayPal or through Cash App. Cash App is $RashidunDC, and support this work, because this is you know, the gems. Like, imagine, like Justin said, imagine how many Malcolm X's we are not tapping into. Our community is losing out on because we have shunned these brothers and sisters too. You know, the DC Jails Women's Center has immense need for mentoring, for people to come in, spend some time. Once this COVID crisis is over, I urge you, it's Ramadan, to make this a cause that you can adopt. And may, you know, just like we, you know, freeing the prisoners is one of those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. And we do this for his, you know, people here, and God, hopefully he frees us from the fire of hell. So thank you so much for joining in today and being a part of our show. And we'll be here tomorrow. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.